Congratulations. What an important topic. And can you hear me? Sorry. And a great job. Tell me, either of you, to start, how did this film first come about? Because you have footage from very early in COVID, and I'm wondering if you were starting prior to COVID and then you had to pivot very quickly.
No. As I like to say, COVID is the inciting event in the film, and it was the inciting event for making the film. So what happened was very early on, maybe second, third week of March, a mutual friend of Ruth's and mine put us in touch and basically said, you both are talking about this time that it needs to be documented. We think you should talk to each other. And I knew Ruth a little bit from making a prior film. And we got on the phone, and I was thinking about just the restaurants, and Ruth grasped very quickly that this was going to affect our entire food system. And she really thought we should be documenting it all. So we just jumped in, and we started recording Zoom calls Ruth had with people, thinking we would just use them for research and development, because if you remember early on, we didn't know how long the pandemic would last, so we thought we might be out in the field shooting soon.
Sure.
And then as we kind of started getting her Zoom calls in, we realized there was something really important about them because they caught a very specific moment in time and a sort of intimacy and vulnerability and spontaneity. So we eventually just incorporated those into the film later on.
Okay, so about how many, it's a sprawling cast of characters and everyone adds so much to with their individual stories. How many were there?
I mean, 10, 11 characters. It depends if you're counting our policy people who are not kind of main characters, but they're sort of expert witnesses characters.
But Ruth was interviewing. At the end, you can see, like, if you keep watching the credits, you know, I think there's 100 people in the participants list.
170, actually.
170.
Yeah.
Ruth was talking to 170 people. So, and that's the documentary task, right? Is to narrow it down and find the stories that work on their own and work together. Yeah,
and we kind of started finding our characters while we were shooting and while she was, she didn't talk to 170 people on a regular basis, but she started talking to about 25, 30 people on a regular basis. And then we sort of whittled that down in the edit room.
Yeah, so talk about the challenges of editing down those stories. And did you, for the most part, keep it chronological?
We yes, for the most part, we decided that we would basically tell the story over a course of a year and a half, and sort of like get a sense of the seasons and time passing. But there are sort of elements of it that are not chronological. Yeah, that was the first task at hand. We wanted to represent different parts of the country, different types of food production work, different kind of political opinions. Yeah, and really we wanted to find people who were actually like innovating and trying to do new things, and people who were independent of the industrialized food model.
Sure. Now, I assume other people had this similar reaction, but I felt angry and I felt, just like, how did we get to this point? What can people do, when faced with this information?
I mean, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. I mean, Laura's going to talk about the impact campaign that she's been working really assiduously on. I just want to say that I think the what can we do question is very individual, right? Like everybody has a different answer. But for me, I'll just say for me, and regarding what's happening in Hollywood right now, because I think this is a story of how you preserve a market.
Yeah.
How you preserve a market is by having independent companies, independent farms in this case, making stuff.
In fair competition with each other.
In fair competition. Otherwise, you do not have a healthy market.
The parallels striking.
So for me, just in my reading and from working on this film, I feel it's a policy issue. And we tried to, that's one way of looking at it. And I think we tried to really draw out the history of American policy, how it was that we got to this place. Was another layer of the film of 50 years of this cheap food policy. So I think policy is at the core of this. It's at the core of the consolidation in Hollywood. We have to change laws to protect independence.
Yeah, and I think I would say that if Ruth were here, and she was supposed to be, but she couldn't be here, she would say the same thing. She would say that she used to tell people, vote with your dollars, vote with your pocketbook. If you go out and buy sustainably raised food, that will change the minds of the corporations. And making this movie with her changed her mind about that completely. I mean, yes, we should all do that if we can afford to do that. And of course, there's a whole economic paradox there. But I agree. I think that really is, figuring out where your representatives and your senators stand on some of these issues coming up in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill comes up twice a decade. It's coming up in September of this year. And it doesn't move very much every 5 years to 5 years, but there are things that they're trying to get into this Farm Bill about getting more dollars to farmers who want to transition to regenerative farming. They're trying to include an anti-monopoly clause in this bill as well. So that's one thing you can do. You can, get on the phone and call your representative and ask them questions.
Okay. And I'm thinking, as I was watching, I was thinking back to even the debates in 2020, the presidential debates. I don't recall any candidate talking about food, even though this is literally the most universal experience. We all eat every single day. And yet there is like an apathy, maybe from people
I think we're just removed from the people who grow our food. I think most people go to the supermarkets and buy their food and they don't think about where it comes from, and that's understandable. We're just cut off from that experience, 50 years ago, 75 years ago, many people knew farmers. They had people in their family who farmed. We're just very cut off from it.
Yeah, that's the industrialized model. That's the Ford factory model, right? It's like you're a widget on the line. You never see the whole thing. And for me, what's so beautiful about documentary is that because film is a time-based medium and because we can zoom all over the world, we can paint a kaleidoscope of so many makers, in this case, who grow and make our food. And we can connect the dots among them so that one of our goals with this film was to give the audience, and we ourselves also, this sense of intimacy with the people behind our food, which we've lost.
How did you choose, or was it more Ruth, the people that were highlighted?
It was a group effort. I mean, we started out with sort of the higher profile restaurant people that she of course has known for many, many years. Different people on our producing team brought in ideas, and then as you can see in the film, some of our subjects said, "Hey, you should meet Karen Washington. She's amazing." Or she was amazing. Yeah, and she is fierce.
And by the way,
Marcus
the statistics on Black farm ownership,
it's a whole other documentary that should be made on its own. And we could only touch on it, but it's quite shocking. I mean, the lending practices that happened, predatory lending practices that happened, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s with Black farmers is just like shocking.
And that extends to other farmers who are all in debt again and again and again, as we learn. It's a story of economics as much as it is a social story and a policy story. Yeah, absolutely. That was another discovery in making the film, that we realized, oh my God, we're making a film about economics and labor. Like we're not experts in economics, but it really became an economics lesson for us in many ways. I hope that that's a really clear kind of through line in the film, that you start to understand farm economics and restaurant economics.
Most of our farmland doesn't produce food that we eat. It produces corn and soy for processed food, junk food, and for animals.
Yeah. Corn and soy, I'm thinking, is like Disney, like to draw the parallels. Right. Disney and Warner
Fox
Brothers.
News.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's what happens when you have two crops, and
But I just want to say, I think the thing that was like encouraging to us is that we really found that people on the right and left actually agree about a lot of these issues. And that was fascinating. If you just strip away the language and talk about it in very concrete terms, Angela Knuth is turning her conventional farm organic for economic reasons solely. She discovers that she also finds it rewarding to improve her soil, but that is not why she's doing it. She's not doing it for climate change. She's doing it to make more money.
Right.
So there are these ways that we can find unity in some of these issues that will help everyone. And I think that was a big lesson for me in making the film.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful, and that there are these issues out there that where the right and the left can come together is our only hope. You know, this kind of issue, the other issues around, you know, there are some other issues too, and it's like I feel like that's our path is finding this common ground across the aisle, and this is one of those issues.
Yep.
Yeah. And what kind of reception have you gotten so far along the starting in Sundance? That feels like 20 years ago.
I'll tell you one little anecdote about Sundance that is lovely, I think. So Ruth hadn't met any or very few of these subjects, these characters, because she was on Zoom with them the whole time.
Yeah.
And they hadn't met each other. So we brought everyone to our Sundance premiere, and they all saw it for the first time at our premiere and met each other. And Ruth met them for the first time. So it was a beautiful premiere for that reason.
The audience loves that.
Yeah, and just back to that sort of that the issue that can connect, that can right and left, or moderates, even moderates on both sides. And I think also I just want to say Steve Stratford is so important in this movie as well.
He's our handsome cowboy in Kansas.
Exactly, just that he himself is a professed Republican. He's willing to say, ag fares better under Democrats. And then he, together with his colleagues, foments these hearings. And you see senators on the right and the left arguing for a fair market economy.
Cory Booker and Senator Thune agree.
Together. And so I just think that's, every time I watch the film, Laura, I get some new thoughts. And this time I was like, wow, this is our hope. This is our path.
Well, and food shouldn't be political. I mean, what about food should be political? It should be a unifying thing that we all agree on, and I think there are ways to do that. So, I mean, I'm hopeful. I also will say, I think, industrialized agriculture is entrenched, and it's a huge ship to turn around, and it's not going to happen quickly.
Well,
So-
I was going to ask about what about the lobbyists? You don't really touch on that much in this film, but I would imagine there's a stranglehold on both parties in some ways.
For sure. I mean, Steve Stratford will tell you it's not in the film, but his local representatives are bought and paid for, he says. Yeah. And their constituents are ranchers, so it doesn't make much sense, but...
And it sounds like socialism on the right, to like break up the big four packers. But it's the only thing that's going to save the small farmer,
And you mentioned earlier before the film, this has happened before, so it can happen again. We have seen big, these monoliths broken up, and so there is hope.
The pendulum swings back and forth, I think, but we're in a particularly bad place right now in many industries.
In Hollywood in 1948, the famous consent decree broke up the studios because they had monopolies, because they owned production and distribution and exhibition. Guess who owns production, exhibition, and distribution and exhibition now?
The studios.
The streamers.
The streamers.
Oh, the streamers, sorry.
So it's that they have to be broken up if we're going to save independent film. And it's such a beautiful parallel to ranching and farming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you work in this industry, in the film industry, and to watch this, I was struck constantly by those parallels. Like, wow, this is exactly what we're seeing.
It really is.
And that same idea that you cannot earn a living.
It's the same thing for independent filmmakers.
Or writers or actors who aren't getting the residuals, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Right. And then you have Dwayne Johnson making $50 million a year or $100 million a year. And, I don't know, though, if there is a way to galvanize the public to see the importance of their food and how this is something that needs to be addressed immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really sorry to say I don't have an answer for that. I mean, what we're trying to do with this film, it'll make a tiny little dent, but we're really pushing to get this in front of as many senators and representatives on the two ag committees, just to sort of help them frame a conversation. And then we're going to be doing a sort of a second phase of impact with a lot of regional screenings and bringing together partnering organizations in agricultural counties across the country. and have conferences around those things and try to see if we can kind of build some momentum. Because some of the issues, even though the Farm Bill is coming up, antitrust is evergreen, right? I mean, like, that's not going away, and that's not going to be solved by the Farm Bill. So, yeah, I mean, I think people should maybe educate themselves about, you know, where their representatives stand, as I said before. Yeah, and in addition, even though, you know, it's not the same, but I do think it does help to really think about where your food comes from, and if you can afford it, support your local ranchers and farmers and purveyors as much as possible.
Right, buy locally.
Buy locally.
And also, just like, is your outreach working at all with kids at the school level? Because, you know, I think of like every school, they're buying 3D printers. Why not like invest that money in just like have a garden that every kid in the school has to work, you know, 1 hour a day?
Which Alice Waters has, you know, of course, her movement doing that in a lot of schools in Oakland and other places in the country.
Edible Schoolyard,
Edible
right?
Schoolyard, yeah.
That's her NGO of Alice Waters, Edible Schoolyard.
Yeah.
And they build a curriculum around the food, and I know we're hoping to do an educational, you know, push with this film as well, with curriculum and all of that as well. So if we can we have to raise money for our impact campaign. So if anyone's interested, go to foodandcountryfilm.com.
Foodandcountryfilm.com. Bookmark it.
Yes.
Will you work on another film in this area again? Is there a sequel? Is this a franchise?
I don't know. I don't know.
It's worth saying that this is Laura's third food film, the first being about Jonathan Gold, the Pulitzer Prize winning, amazing, pioneering food critic. And then her second food film about Otto Lengi, the chef. And now Food and Country. So it's if you take them all together, they actually paint a really beautiful picture, a larger picture of something so deeply important, and as Ruth says at the end, something that reflects not just us as our values as a nation, but as human beings.
Yeah. So I don't know about another one. We'll see.
Now, are we allowed to ask? Okay, or no questions from the audience. We can't even see the audience, but. Okay, so then final question for Rhode Island here. I loved what the guy was doing in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Is there anything like that here in Rhode Island, where I assume we have a lot of kelp to be harvested?
I don't know specifically, but if people are interested, they can go to Bren's nonprofit called greenwave.org, and they are continuing to train farmers all up and down the eastern seaboard. So I would imagine yes.
That's a great, that's
a great
I
question.
bet Bren is available to Eastern Seaboard fishermen and women.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about becoming an ocean farmer is that he told me that basically it only takes about a $20,000 investment to get everything you need to lease the land, to lease the water, and to get the equipment you need and buy the boat you need. So compared to becoming a land farmer, it's very affordable.
Wow, that is.
Yep.
That's great to know. All right, well, another thing for Rhode Islanders to perhaps explore. We have plenty of water here.
Plenty of kelp. Yep.
Well, thank you, and congratulations to both of you. So
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you so much.
My
Tatiana.
pleasure.
Thank you to
you.
Thanks,
Newport
everyone.
Film.
Andrea, Newport Film,
Thank you,
Kathleen,
Andrea. Thank you
and thank you to the
all.
audience.
Thanks to the audience.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
Great turnout.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank
thank
you,
you,
Laura.
weather
Thank
gods.
you, Caroline.